welcome to the Crane Bag Podcast. I am Jay Leeming. Today we will continue our exploration of the epic story of the Irish warrior, poet, druid, and outlaw, Finn MacCool. Thank you for joining me. Let us begin. There is a land that does not change. A land in which each day is like a blossom that never fades, never withers to the ground. Where each day is a song always sung, a song of happiness and joy that never becomes tiresome and never grows old. This land is known as Tir na Nog, and it exists as a drop of dew dangling from a blade of grass, a drop of dew which will never fall. Still, though this land never changes, each year they have a ceremony to determine who shall be king of this land. Now the king of Tir na Nog had been king for as long as anyone could remember. But still, each year, they would all gather at a great grassy hill. And at a shout from the chief druid, everyone who wished to be king would start sprinting up this hill. At the top there was a golden throne, and the one who sat in this throne first would be king. So, in a time like any other time, in a year like any other year, once again the king of Tir na Nog sprinted to the top of that hill and sat down in that golden throne. And from that throne he could look far out at the world. He saw the others, the stragglers, the losers, come up the hill, out of breath, after him. And then he began to walk down. And as he walked, on this morning, doubt entered his heart. If this had not happened, perhaps everything would have been different. Perhaps there would be no story to tell. But, like a shadow, doubt entered him. And he went to his chief druid, and he said, "My druid, tell me, shall I always be king of Tir na Nog, or one day will there come another to rule over this land?" And his chief druid said, "Your Majesty, though you are king now, you will not be king forever. For there will come another, a human man. He will marry your daughter Niamh, the princess, and he will rule Tir na Nog, for he will sprint up this hill and reach that throne before you. And what's more, you will give him your kingdom, not with bitterness or anger, but gladly, because you will look at him and you will see that in fact he is stronger than you are, he is wiser, and he is the better king. This is what I see." "This will never happen," said the king. "This will never happen." Now this king was not a druid, but he had a druid wand with which he could cast certain spells. So the next morning, early, he went to the palace garden. There was music in this garden, for his daughter Niamh was sitting beneath a blossoming pear tree, strumming a harp and singing. And the notes of her song were like birds circling around that tree, beautiful birds of many colors. And her father the king came softly, quietly, keeping to the shadows, with the druid wand in his hand. He crept up behind his daughter as she sang, and then he reached out and he tapped her on the head with that wand. "Oh," she said. She stopped her song. She could feel something had changed. Something was different. Her father slinked away into the shadows and was gone. She put a hand to her face. Her face felt rough, bristly. She felt her jaw. There was a strange thing happening. There were large teeth there, bigger than before. What had happened? She put down her harp. She stood up. She walked urgently to the palace, through the hallways, making sure no one saw her. And then she went to her bedroom and she closed the door. And she stood before her mirror, and she saw that she had the face of a wild boar. There were two great tusks sticking up from her mouth. There were bristles and hairs everywhere. She wept to see this, the tears trickling down her face, down the tusks, and to the floor. Well, she spent the day in her room. But the next morning, early, She left her room. She left the palace. She walked past the palace garden. She walked out into the forest. She knew where the chief druid would be. She knew his habits. For each morning he would walk among the trees, pondering the future and the past, looking deep into the present moment as others might look into the waters of a stream. She found him there walking between the trees. She did not waste words. She looked at him and she said simply, "Can this be undone?" He looked at her. "Yes, my lady, it can be undone. This spell you are under, it can be broken if you marry a human man, a man from the kingdom of Ireland." She turned from the druid and strode back towards the palace. She went straight to the stable, and there in the stable was her white horse. She led her horse out of that stable, she mounted that horse, and she slapped the reins against his sides, and off the horse went. So she galloped away from that palace and through the forests. So they galloped across a field and towards the sea. A princess on a white horse with the face of a boar, riding that horse straight towards the sea. And when they reached that sea, the horse gave a great jump and leapt out onto the top of the waves. And this horse galloped for a long time, and they rode through night and through day. They rode through strange storms where the lightning crackled green and blue. They rode over this ocean for many days. And at last the mist and the clouds cleared away, and at last before her she saw the green land of Ireland. Well, she brought that horse up onto the shore, and she brought that horse into the forest. And she got off of that horse and tied him to a tree. And she, this Princess Niamh with the boar face, she walked through that forest looking for the Fianna. For she had heard stories of their exploits. Their deeds and adventures had spread far and wide in the mouths of the bards, in the beautiful rippling songs that they sang. And she had heard of Finn MacCool, and of Dermot, and of Conan Mowell, and also of Oisin, Finn's son. So she sought Oisin in particular. And she came to the camp of the Fianna, but it was largely empty. No one was there. So she walked away. She walked through a field. She walked past the stone water trough, where often the Fianna would wash their hands and water their horses. And then she walked through the forest, following their tracks. At last she found them. They were gathered in the forest, and there was a large heap of dead deer beneath the tree. They'd had good hunting that day. And as she watched, each of them lifted up a deer onto his shoulders and went walking away. Finn MacCool went, Dermot went, Conan went, all the others went. Finally there was only Oisin, and he was left with 2 deer to carry. "They've gone and left me," Oisin said to the air, "me with 2 deer to carry." In this moment, Princess Niamh stepped out from between the trees. Oisin heard her footsteps on the ground, and he looked up. "Good day, lady," he said. "Good day to you, Oisin of the Fianna," she said. "It looks like you could use some help with those deer." "It's true," said Oisin. "I wouldn't mind a hand at all." So she bent down and hefted one of those deer onto her shoulders. And Oisin did the same, and they went walking through the forest. Well, it wasn't long before it seemed right to take a break for a moment, to pause. So they stopped at a tree and put those deer down beside the tree, and they sat at the base of that tree with their backs to it. And they talked of this and that, of rain and wind and weather. And then finally Oisin asked the question which was in the air, which was always there, and he looked at her and he said, "My lady, where are you from, and how did you come to be as you are? Tell me, please, what is your story?" And she said, "Oisin, I am Princess Niamh from the land of Tir na Nog. I was put under a spell by a dark druid, and so I appear as you see me now. Yet I have come to you, seeking your hand in marriage, for it is said that if I marry a human man, then this spell will be broken, and I will regain my former appearance. So I have come to you. For long I have heard the stories of your adventures and your generosity and your braveness of heart. So I have come to you, Oisin, seeking your hand in marriage. Do you wish to join with me, to break this spell, so that we may live in love in the land of Tir na Nog? Oisin did not hesitate. Lady, I would happily marry you. I would happily live with you in the land of Tir na Nog. So they spoke, and then they lifted the deer onto their shoulders and went walking through the forest. And at length they came to that field where the water trough was, and they walked to it. All of the Fianna were there, washing their hands, drinking the water, talking about all that had happened that day on the hunt in the forest. And then they saw Oisin coming with Princess Niamh, with the strange face, with the bristles and the tusks of the boar jutting up from her jaw. But all the same, Finn looked at them both and simply said, "Greetings to you, Oisin, my son. Greetings to you, dear lady." "Father, this is Lady Niamh from the kingdom of Tir na Nog," said Oisin, "and it is our desire to be married." Well, Finn took a deep breath for a moment. She did have the face of a boar, after all. But he had dealt with magical events before. He had been to the other world. He had seen the way the moment can flex and change and become something else, how the river of each instant can flow into the sea and up into the clouds and back into the river again. So, thinking of this, remembering this, he looked at them both and said, "That would be a happy thing. That would be a joyful thing. Let it be so, tomorrow, after the rising of the sun." So they all ate together that evening, and then when night came and darkness covered the world, they all slept in the forest. And in the morning the birds began to sing, and the sun rose, and a new day came. And that day, in the field by that water trough, Niamh and Oisin were married. Finn led the ceremony. He said the bright and beautiful words. And Oisin and Niamh, they as well, promised their love to each other, their words binding them together in a beautiful pattern that neither one of them could have foreseen before they met. And as they spoke these words, as Niamh spoke these words, her face began to change, and the bristles shriveled and faded, and their teeth changed. Those great tusks became teeth once again, and suddenly she no longer had the face of a pig, but was simply a beautiful woman. And the two of them kissed in that field, and everyone laughed and sang a beautiful song. So Niamh lived with Oisin and with the Fianna for many days, and he showed her all his favourite places in the forest, and they went ranging around Ireland, and he showed her the hills and the valleys he loved, and the flowing streams. But finally a day came, there in the camp of the Fianna, when Niamh said, "Oisin, it is time to go to the land of Tir na Nog. It is time for you to meet my family and see my land, so you understand the roots of my story." "Yes," said Oisin, "I would love to see the land of Tir na Nog." So she went off into the forest and found her white horse, and she led him down to the sea. And Oisin came with her, looked out at those crashing waves, and then he turned, and he saw that all of the Fianna were there. There was his father, Finn MacCool, and there was Dermot of the generous heart, and there was Conan Mowell, that burly man who would go through a door if it was open and go through a door if it was closed. And there was Kilcha, the poet and runner of the Fianna, who had once gathered 2 of every animal in Ireland into a house with 9 doors there in Tara at the request of the king. And there were all the others that he knew so well. And he looked at them all and he said, "Goodbye. I am going to Tir na Nog. I will be back soon to tell you stories of that beautiful and bright land." And Finn said, "Oh, my son, why do I feel that I look upon you now for the last time? Why do I feel that you will go to Tir na Nog and I will never see you again?" "Oh, father," said Oisin, "do not fear. I will go to Tir na Nog, and Niamh and I will return. And you and I shall walk through the forests of Ireland, and we, all of the Fianna, will sit and sing the old songs and tell the old stories around crackling fires here in the land that is my home." "May it be so, my son. "May it be so," said Finn, and they embraced. And he said goodbye to Dermot, and to Conan Mowell, and to Keilcha, and all the others. And then Niamh got on that white horse, and Oisin got on that horse behind her, and with a slap of the reins that horse galloped out onto the waves. It was a long journey. They passed through day and night. They passed through clouds and through mist. They passed through a large storm, crackling with blue and green lightning. And once, Oisin looked out across the waves, and he saw a boy and a girl running, laughing, tossing a red ball between them. And once, Oisin looked down and saw a white palace far down on the floor of the sea. So they passed through night and day, light and darkness alternating like the beating of a great heart. And then at last the mist and cloud was blown away by the wind, and there was a shore, and there was the great land of Tir na Nog. And she brought that white horse onto the shore, and Oisin saw the beautiful palace of gold and silver, this palace of 100 towers. And 100 women dressed in green and gold came down from that palace, bearing candles, singing to greet them. And 100 young men came down from that palace, dressed in red and gold, bearing candles, singing to greet them. And 1,000 birds were released into the air, white birds that circled and sang a beautiful song. And the trees themselves seethed with luminous wind, and everything was a great song in a moment that seemed to ring out forever like the sound of a great bell. And Niamh's father was there, and his wife the queen. And he said, "Welcome, Oisin. Welcome to the land of Tir na Nog." "Thank you," said Oisin. "Thank you, your majesty." And that night there was a great feast in the palace, and it seemed to Oisin that he had never tasted food so delicious, never drunk down wine so wonderful, never drunk down even water so clear and filled with wisdom, it seemed, down into his body. And a bard sang a song, and it was the most beautiful song Oisin had ever heard, like a waterfall pouring, not just from the heights down to the depths, but through night and through day, falling for 1,000 years, and each drop of water in that waterfall was itself a world, and inside it you could see the entire cosmos. So the bards sang, and then they slept, and that night Oisin and Niamh slept in a royal bedroom in that palace, and their breathing became one breath, and their song became a single song, and their cries became one cry, ringing out in the night, as beautiful as a bird flying away from a branch. And the stars shone down as they would always shine, and the dark between them was deep and endless, as it always would be. And the next day, everyone gathered at the foot of the great green hill to choose a king for the next year. And the chief druid was there, and he gave a great cry, and everyone who wished to be king set off running up that hill. And Oisin ran as fast as he could, and all the others did as well, their feet pounding the grass. Higher and higher they went. There was the golden throne, and Oisin reached it first, and he sat down in that golden throne, and he looked far off across the world. And then Niamh's father came running up that hill, out of breath, just behind him. And for a moment he stood before Oisin, his heart pounding in his chest, his breath going in and out. He stood before him with joy. And then he said, "Oisin, you shall be king of Tir na Nog now, for I see that you are stronger than I, and wiser as well. You will be a good king. I give my kingdom to you, Oisin. I crown you the king of Tir na Nog." "Thank you," said Oisin, "thank you. May I rule wisely and well." And the two of them walked down that green hill towards the palace, and they talked of many things as they walked. Many secrets of the ruling of Tir na Nog were shared between them. And that day there was a great coronation ceremony in the feasting hall of Tir na Nog, and afterwards there was a feast. And once again the bread and the roast meat and all the delicious foods were more delicious than any food that Oisin had ever tasted. and the wine he drank from the glass was more wonderful than any he'd ever tasted before. And the bards sang, and their songs went up like birds circling in the clear, bright air. And then night came, and everyone slept. And Oisin continued to live in Tir na Nog, and every day was a bird flying away from a branch and circling around the world and returning. And every day was filled with joy indescribable, joy that cannot be fit into words, but it never became tiresome, and it never became old. How long he spent there is hard to say, for each moment was every other moment. Every day was an eternal day, an entire world in that day, from morning to night. And night, too, was simply the dreaming of that day, the other life they all lived, journeying through the darkness until day was born once again. But after a long time or a short time, one day, in the palace garden, as Niamh and Oisin were walking there, he spoke and said, "Ah, my love, ah, my dear queen, I long so to see my father Finn MacCool once more, to see again Dermot and Conan Mowell and Kilcha. I long so to walk once more on the green kingdom of Ireland." "I have known this day would come," said Niamh. "I have known it for a long time." "I must go," said Oisin. "I must go just to visit them once more, to talk with them, to see how my father is getting on. I will go and visit for a little while, and then I will come back here to you, to live with you in love and harmony in the land of Tir na Nog." "Oh, Oisin, do not go," said Niamh. "Do not go, for I fear if you leave us you will never return. For life here is a bubble that never breaks, a wave that never reaches the shore. But the land of Ireland, the land of humans, it is a world of sweat and blood and death. Flowers wither there. Candles gutter out, and there is darkness afterwards. The song fades into a silence from which it will never return. Oisin, do not go." "Everything you say is true," said Oisin, "but my heart longs to go, and so I must." Niamh clutched his coat and looked into his eyes. "Oisin, take my horse. If you must go, take my white horse, for he is very magical. Stay on the back of this horse, Oisin. Do not get off, for you will be able to go all the way to Ireland on this magical horse. You will be able to see all of your friends and to travel throughout Ireland. But if once you set foot on the ground of Ireland, then this horse will gallop away here back to Tir na Nog, and you will be left to live out your life as a dead seed, as a tree with no leaves, with the wind blowing through it." "I will do as you say," said Oisin. "I will ride your white horse to Ireland, but I will not set foot on the ground." So later that day they went to the stable of the palace, and there was the white horse, and Oisin led it out of the stable and to the sea. And Niamh stood beside him, with tears trickling from her eyes. "Come back to me, Oisin, come back. Do not stay in the land of Ireland, but return to live with us here in the land of Tir na Nog." "I will, my love," he said. And he turned and saw that a great crowd had come down to the sea to say goodbye. And there were Niamh's parents, her mother and father, and there were the bards who had sung in the feasting hall, and everyone who had tried to run up that hill, and all the 100 ladies and all the 100 men, dressed in green and gold, dressed in red and gold. And Niamh's father and mother each embraced Oisin in turn. "Come back to us," they said, "come back to us. You were a bird flying away from the branch in our hearts. Please return to sing with us again, here in the land of Tir na Nog." "I will," said Oisin. And so he climbed onto the back of that white horse, and with a slap of the reins that horse galloped out onto the waves. And Oisin rode through mist and through cloud, through night and through day. And once again he passed through a great storm, crackling with lightning blue and green. And once again he saw a boy and a girl laughing, running across the waves, tossing a red ball between them. And once again Oisin looked down, and he saw a white palace on the floor of the sea, and beside it many trees, their branches moving in some sort of undersea wind. And night and day passed around him, as though light and darkness were just something poured from one jar into another and then back again. And at last the mist and the clouds were blown away by the wind, and he saw before him the green land of Ireland. Well, he rode that horse up to the shore, and then into the forest. He was glad to be back. Ireland at last, his heart sang to him as he went. But looking around, the forest seemed strange. It was not like any forest in Ireland he'd seen before. The trees were familiar, but they were in strange places. The boulders turned around as though someone had jumbled up the land of Ireland, mixed it up while he'd been gone. He went through the forest looking for familiar landmarks, a hill, a stream. He found a stream he seemed to know, but it was roaring in a different way. He found a boulder that looked familiar, but the trees around it were all strange, different. So he went through the forest looking for landmarks. I just came at a different spot, he said to himself. I arrived in a different part of Ireland than I'm used to. And so he went north, seeking the camp of the Fianna. He did not find it. But he did find the dusty track of a road, and he went along it for some distance, the dust rising in the air behind him. And then he came to a house, and there was a woman in front of this house, right by the porch, and she had a basket filled with wet laundry, and she was taking clothespins and pinning these clothes, these pants, shirts, and socks, to this clothesline. And Oisin said, "Greetings, dear lady. Please, can you tell me, where is Finn MacCool? Have you seen the Fianna or the camp of the Fianna anywhere around here?" She looked at him strangely with a clothespin in her mouth. Then she took it out and she said, "Finn MacCool? You're looking for Finn MacCool? Finn's a story, mister. Finn's just a story." "What?" said Oisin. "He's just a story. He's long gone. Don't talk this nonsense to me. I have things to do." "Good day, dear lady," Oisin said. And he urged his horse on. And he went further down this dusty track of a road. And the birds sang in the trees above him, but they seemed to be different birds than he was used to. Their songs, more songs of twilight than of morning. And as he went, he came to another house. And in front of this house there was an old stump, and there was a man in brown suspenders sitting on it, smoking a pipe. The smoke gathered around him and then drifting away in the breeze. And Oisin greeted him and said, "Good day, sir. Good day to you. Can you tell me, have you seen Finn MacCool near here, or any of the Fianna? For I am seeking the camp of the Fianna." The man took his pipe out of his mouth and looked at Oisin, looked at him for a long time. And then finally he said, "He's in the pub." "What?" said Oisin. "He's in the pub. That's where you'll hear all those stories. The stories of Finn and Dermot and them folk. It's all in the pub. That's where they sing those stories. You can go. Go tonight. It's in town, on the left." Oisin understood most of these words, but not what they all meant together. It was as though the man were speaking another language. "Thank you," said Oisin. "Thank you." And he urged his horse on. And then he left that dusty track and he went through the forest, keeping to the shadowy places, where the moss sits, illuminated by rays of sun, and where the birds sing. They were comforting to him, those wild places, for though they were different, there was still some memory in them he seemed to know. So he went through the forest, looking for landmarks, and at last, among a grove of pine trees, he found something familiar. He found the stone water trough. It was no longer in a field. The trees had grown up around it. They were tall, twisted trees with the memories of many winters kept inside them in their rings. But the water trough was the water trough. He remembered drinking from it. He remembered washing his hands in that water trough in the middle of the field. He remembered being married to Niamh, right there by that water trough. And Oisin said to himself, "Oh, how I long! Oh, how I long to simply wash my hands in the water of this water trough one more time." And with this song aching in his heart, He stepped down from the horse, and his foot touched the ground of Ireland. And as he did so, suddenly he was 1,000 years old. Suddenly he fell, his body crumpled up, filled with aches and pains. "Ah!" he said. He fell down to the ground. He looked up. He saw the white horse galloping away between the trees, into the shadows, now gone. "Help!" he said. "Help!" He looked up. The water trough seemed immensely large, above his head, high up. He could not reach it. He was far. He could barely move. He seemed to be a man made of dust and smoke. "Help!" he cried. "Help!" But no one heard him. No one heard him at all. The birds sang on above him in the trees. He listened. Birds, wind, that was it. So he lay there, waiting, as the day moved on, as the sun neared the horizon. Soon it seemed the end of the day would come, for the shadows were lengthening, the orange light of the sun shining between the trees. And in this moment Oisin heard a sound. It was the clip-clop of hooves coming closer. "Help!" he cried. "Help!" His groaning voice lurching out into the air. And the sound of the hooves came closer and closer, and then he looked up and he saw a man on a horse. This man had a white collar, for he was a priest. And he looked down and he said, "Ah, dear man, what has happened to you?" "I've fallen," said Oisin. "Well, let's get you up again," said the man. And he got off of that horse, and he tried to help Oisin up, but in the end he simply had to lift him. He lifted him up onto the back of that horse, because Oisin could barely move. And this man, this priest, got on that horse, and off they went, clip-clopping through the forest. And they came to the priest's house, and this man carried Oisin in through the door, and put him in a chair by the fire. And he brought him some bread, and some cheese, and some tea, which he put on a little table beside him. There you go now, he said. "You've had a fall, but you're all right now." And Oisin thanked him feebly, and he tried to eat, but before he could, he fell sound asleep. He slept for a long time. He was not sure how many days and nights passed. When he awoke, he was in a bed, and the priest cared for him for many days. And after a while he could walk a little better, but still he was very feeble, very weak. And he would spend most of his days, and his nights as well, sitting by the fire. And the priest, whose name was Patrick, asked Oisin many questions about who he was and where he was from. And Oisin answered these questions, answered them with stories. Stories of Finn MacCool, his father, who had been raised in the forest by Lealucha and Beaumont, who had studied with Finnegas the poet beside the River Boyne, and eaten the salmon of knowledge, the salmon who swims between the worlds. His father, who had found a spear singing in the earth, and had used it to defend Tara from Alien, the fiery one from the other world, and how his head had been loaned to the kingdom of Ireland for 3 days, before it had been reclaimed by Alien himself. And he told him stories of Conan Mowell and Keelcha, and of Dermot, and how once they had been all caught in a house where death lived and youth lived as well, and how once Dermot had journeyed beneath the sea, for he'd fallen in love with a princess from beneath the sea, and how he had come back empty-handed after healing her, with a heart filled with sadness. And he told him many other stories besides, about Manannan, the lord of the sea, and the Dagda, and the Fomorians, and the Firbolgs, the bag men, who once had lived in Ireland, and how the invisible ones had gone into the hills, where they speak still, singing their songs, and how, on a strange night, if you go by a broken way, if you go by a crooked step, you might fall into their song and never leave. So he told Patrick all of these stories, and Patrick wrote them down. He didn't believe a word of them. They were all fantasies to him, strange, almost drunken thoughts coming from this addled man sitting by the fire. But they were curious, they were interesting, and the people in them seemed almost real. So Patrick wrote all of these stories down as best he could, listening hard with his heart and his mind, and with his fingers writing them down into a great book. And as the days went by, Oisin slept more and more, as though night was his home now, and day was a bright land he only visited briefly. And now he told only one story, and it was the story of the beautiful land of Tir na Nog and the Princess Niamh, who had been cursed to have the face of a pig, but who had been freed by the love shared between her and Oisin himself. And every day he spoke of the beautiful palace at Tir na Nog and its 100 towers, and of the men in red and gold, and the women in green and gold, and of that green grassy hill, and what it was to sit in that throne and look far out across the world. So day after day, Oisin told this story, and each day it grew smaller, shriveling up like a flower, withering in the cold wind of autumn, its leaves turning brown and then falling down to the earth. And then one morning, Patrick found Oisin sitting in his favorite chair by the fire, but his eyes looked ahead into emptiness, and his breath was still. So Patrick reached out and closed Oisin's eyes and spoke a velvet prayer out into the air. And a few days later, there was a funeral for Oisin in the local church. Patrick led the ceremony. Not many people came, just a few curious local people from the village. But the woman came who'd been hanging up laundry and who Oisin had spoken to, and the man came who'd been smoking a pipe there in front of his house on the stump, and a few others. And Patrick spoke about Oisin, and he told how this strange man had come, filling the air with stories that were all strange, fantastical nonsense. And with the cross behind him on the wall, and the choir waiting to sing a hymn, Patrick said, "I remember one story Oisin told me, how once the Fianna, on a cold winter's night, went to spend that night in the palace of Tara, with King Cormac MacArt, Cormac who had journeyed to the other world in search of his wife and children, Cormac who'd spoken with the Lord of the Sea himself. And how on this winter's night, as they were all sitting in the great feasting hall of Tara, Cormac looked at all of them, all of the Fianna, at Finn MacCool and Dermot and Conan Mowell and Kilcha and Oisin, and he said, dear friends, tell me, what is the most beautiful music in this world?" Well, they all thought for a moment, and then Kilcha said, "Your Majesty, the most beautiful music is the sound of a sparrow's wings in the air." And Conan Mowell said, "No, the most beautiful music is the clashing of swords, when all seems lost, but in fact victory is certain. That is the most beautiful sound." And Dermot said, "The most beautiful sound is the sigh of a lovely woman." And finally Finn MacCool spoke, and he said, "Your Majesty, the most beautiful music in this world is the music of what happens." And then Patrick closed his Bible, and the choir stood, and they began to sing an old hymn, which rolled through that room like a beautiful river. And then the doors of that church were thrown open to the light, and the congregation stood up and filed out of that church into the city street, filled with horses and carriages, and men smoking pipes, and women going into shops to buy bread and cloth and apples, and little children running. And all the busyness of that village life was happening, and the people went out into that city street. And the priest Patrick was about to follow them out into the world, but he heard something as he stood in the doorway. He heard a sound inside the church. So he walked back into the shadows of that church, and he looked up. There was something near the ceiling. He looked. He saw it was a sparrow, fluttering this way and that between the roof beams of the church, looking for a way out. He watched it go here and there, and then finally it found an open window, and it fluttered out into the air. Here's a poem for you. It is by Humberto Acabal, a poet from Guatemala who passed away just a few years ago. The poem is called The River, or El Rio, and there's one word in it you should know, yagual. That's a piece of cloth that's woven, and you use it to like put under your knees when you're doing work on the ground. All right, The River. Kneeling on a yagual, bent over a stone, my mother washes, washes, and washes. My little sister, covered with willow leaves, sleeps in a basket. Sitting on a pile of straw, I see the way the water leaves and the way the river stays. Here it is in Spanish, as much as I can do justice to it. El Rio. Arrodillada sobre un yagual, agachada sobre una piedra, mi mamá lava, lava y lava. Mi hermanita, cubierta con hojas de sauce, duerme en un canasto. Yo, sentado sobre un pajonal, miro cómo se va el agua y cómo se queda el río. Kneeling on a yagual, bent over a stone, my mother washes, washes, and washes. My little sister, covered with willow leaves, sleeps in a basket. Sitting on a pile of straw, I see the way water leaves and the way the river stays. This story speaks to me like that poem does, about what is eternal and unchanging and what is subject to time, to death, decay, withering. Ups and downs, valleys, troughs, peaks and valleys, heights and depths. In this story, we have these two realms woven together. We have the realm of Ireland, and then we have this realm of Tir na Nog, this place where it's always summer, it's always sunny, everything's always wonderful, awesome. And then the realm of Ireland is involved. I love the way these two places are connected. It's very cool. And over there in Tir na Nog, it's not all smooth sailing. Well, not at least in this story. And the king has doubts. Will he be king forever? Which is what the same doubt all of us have. Will I be in love forever? Will I be healthy forever? Will I be happy forever? Well, the answer's no. The answer's no. But in this realm of eternity, even there, for some reason, this king has this doubt. And this doubt is planted like a seed that then flowers into the words of the druid, who knows, maybe he wouldn't have said that, if the king hadn't asked. Maybe that doubt wouldn't change. Maybe having that doubt changed the reality around him. Maybe I'm just saying that, but I guess that's been my experience sometimes. Especially performing, your doubts can alter what happens. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes you have the doubts. It's okay to have the doubts. And things go just fine. It's something happening beyond you. But in any case, in this story, the king has a doubt. He voices it to the druid, and the king finds out that, in fact, he is not going to be king forever, and someone's going to come. His son-in-law is going to come. So he sets about preventing this by giving his daughter the face of a pig. What I love about all this is that the healing, what's required to heal his daughter is union with the realm of the everyday. So healing comes when these two realms are woven together, when the eternal and the daily are mingled and in relationship, not just mixed up, not just bumping up against each other, but in actual relationship, a love relationship here in this situation. That's when the healing comes. Wow. Rumi, in his poems, he writes love poems to God, basically, to Allah. Hafez, similar. All those in that Persian tradition do as well. And sometimes you can't tell whether they are singing a love poem to God or to a human, a woman, or perhaps a man sometimes. Love is how the world is kept together, this world and the other world and this world. So I find that very cool, just because it seems to me that health comes from being aware of the unseen, the other world, what's beyond us, magic, all those things. In a Christian context, it would be just God. If you get right with God, if you got an awareness, if you got a relationship with God, everything will be fine. Which I guess is more or less what I'm kind of saying, the story's saying. But I don't know. It puts me back in Sunday school, which is fine. I don't know. Sunday school works for some people. Did you go to church? Did you go to temple? Did you have organized religion in any way? Listener to this podcast? I don't know. I went. I didn't get a strong dose, I would say. My parents were like, oh, you should go check it out. My mom in particular felt it was sort of something I should experience socially, if nothing else. I think she said basically that, my mother never gave me the impression that it was a spiritual thing I need to be nourished by. She didn't discount that, but she didn't mention it. The main thing for her was the formality of it, the experience of what it's like to go to church culture, I should say. My dad, well, he didn't have strong feelings either. He sang in the choir and liked singing. He loved singing. I remember his big, beautiful voice coming down the aisle at the end of the church service, And at some point, we all drifted away. In high school, I was like, maybe not. And my father, interestingly, I don't know if you need to hear this story, but years later, he decided he didn't believe in God. I came home from college, I think it was, and he told me that. It wasn't a big revelation, but he just sort of announced it. Oh, I decided I don't believe in God. And he said, I went to the minister and I told him, and my father said, I was kind of disappointed. He didn't try to talk me out of it. He was just sort of like, oh, well, that's too bad. See you later. And I left. So that was an interesting moment with my father. My grandfather, who I did not know, he died before I was born, he spent the last 15 years of his life living in India, studying with a master, quote unquote, as it was told to me, in Beas, India, up in the Punjab, I believe, a fellow named Swami Satsang. So I don't know. I always thought that my dad was sort of freaked out by what his father did. We're going back in time here. Like, my dad was born in 1928. My grandfather, I don't know, end of the 19th century. So different times, right? So I used to think, or I tend to think, my dad was kind of freaked out by his father going to India to hang out and do yoga all the time. And so my father was suspicious of religion per se for that reason. Why do I go into all this? Well, because it's kind of interesting and kind of cool. And this story is, we end up talking about the sacred. That's what I end up talking about, which in much of life, American life anyway, we kind of discount, There's churches in my town, for sure. But the sacred isn't really there in an ever-present way. And I guess I hunger for that. Or what I hunger for is the big picture. And science is fascinating, amazing, You look at the map of the universe, such maps as we can have. You look at pictures of far-off things, clouds of gas and dust, and it's mind-blowing, no question. Thinking about the dinosaurs, the past of the Earth, the deep past, the deep history of Earth. Fantastic. So that gives me a larger realm, but it doesn't quite do the trick. Something in me wants something just beyond all that. And I guess if religion, Christianity worked for me, I would go to church. But like others, many others, it doesn't quite do it. Why is that? I don't know. Maybe it just wasn't given to me in the right, most exciting way. I just find these stories tremendously more interesting for my imagination and for my heart. And all of these stories, these traditional stories, many of them contain metaphors for the divine. That's all we have as humans. The believers say Shiva exists. They say God exists. Athena exists. But I see them as windows into something beyond that. The light comes through the window, and you see that light. But it looks a little different if you're a Muslim or a Hindu or whatever. So if my dad were still alive and he and I could talk about it and he wanted to hear what I had to say, I'd say, Dad, I hear that you don't believe in the the guy with the white beard, the old man with a beard. But that's not the only possibility. There's other ideas. That's just a metaphor. That's a way of looking at the divine. And the divine can be a bird, can be a river, can be a fire. It can be Shiva, Athena, Aphrodite. It is numinous. It's not limited by our conception of it, but it is broad-based. It's a spectrum of possibilities. And these stories that I tell speak to those possibilities, and each one is an articulation of that, of the sacred in some way. So this particular story I see as doing exactly that, speaking to our relationship with the divine, with what is eternal and never changes and never fades. And it's just lovely, lovely and sad. And the way he comes back and he doesn't recognize Ireland. And he has that longing just to put his hands in that water trough just one last time. It's beautiful. And it's these daily things. It's the most daily of things. Like, we're in the realm of the everyday, and here's a daily thing. It's not like he wants to come back to Ireland and like, oh, if I could just whatever, whatever, name your thing, have sex on top of that mountain one more time, or just drink that fantastic thing, or go bungee jumping off the Eiffel Tower, some peak experience. It's not a peak experience he's seeking or longing for here. It is the peak experience of the daily life. Getting up, and you drink that coffee. Getting up, you put your shoes on. Whatever it is for you, dear listener. You look out that window, you start the car, and life is happening. He longs not so much as for this ecstatic experience that almost is so intense that it takes him out of life, but he longs for the most daily of experiences. If I could just brush my teeth again in that little bathroom with my wife and my daughter there when she was 6, and we would make up little games with the toothpaste tube. If I could just do that. If I could just do that. So he hungers for the daily, the luminous, beautiful daily, which, after being in Tir na Nog, where everything is golden towers and people singing and 1,000 white birds, suddenly that stone water trough is miraculous. Suddenly, your hand on the doorknob of the bathroom is miraculous. That doorknob, look at it. You've opened that door 100 times, 1,000 times. That bowl you have in the morning, that coffee mug. All of these things have in them the potential to be fantastic, luminous, amazing, to be sacred. So he comes back, and suddenly that water trough is a sacred thing, almost. And he can't help himself. And he steps from the horse, and he's suddenly old. We fall in love with what is daily, the regular, the world, and because of that love, we become old. That's the price of being here. The angels, the spirits, the gods, whoever, what do they get? Do they just get unending music forever? Maybe they're bored. Almost seems so in this story. Almost seems so. Because they hear stories about the Fianna. They hear stories about those who live and die. The Greek world as well. Zeus, Athena, Ares, Aphrodite, they're well versed in what happens on Earth. They have an interest in it. In the Iliad, they come down and they take part because they're really involved. They fall in love with humans, just like in this story. Zeus, all the time, he's down there, but the other gods as well will fall in love with humans. It doesn't always go well for the human, but the divine wants to be engaged in relationship with us. That's what I get from this story. From all these many stories. The divine, what is eternal, wants to be in relationship with us, with the coffee cup, the toothpaste tube, the hubcap of your car. And we, in turn, long for that luminous realm. It's an exchange. It's a marvelous dialogue. It's the singing and the silence after, and the silence between the notes as well. And you need them both. And you need them both, and then you can hear the song. And at the end, we get this beautiful story of Finn and the Fianna in the Palace of Tara. It's wonderful. It's like they're alive again all of a sudden. They've all died, you know. They've all died. Some of them well, some of them horribly. That's another story. But in this little moment when the priest Patrick, who is St. Patrick, who is the St. Patrick, the fella, he who brought Christianity to Ireland, when he tells this story, then they're alive again, and they're there with Cormac, the good king, who followed the purple-cloaked man to the house of the sea god and got that golden cup and made that journey. And Dermot and Oisin, who was found in the forest, child of a dear woman. And Conan Mowell, the burly fella, and Dermot with a generous heart, who went to the realm beneath the sea. So they're all there, and then we get this story. What is the most beautiful music in the world? Which is also, in a way, sort of, it is a hierarchy. You know, what's the most intense, the most fantastic? And we get all these things. And then we get the music of what happens. I think of that phrase frequently. That's what meditation gives me when I get a chance to do that. That's what sitting still does for me. You know, just being on a park bench on a street corner. When I lived in New York City, often I told myself, well, someday, before I move out of this place, I'm going to get up super early, take the subway to Manhattan, pick some street corner, and stand there all day and just see what happens. Well, I never did that. But that was the impulse. And certainly in a place like New York City or any large city, the music of what happens is really grinding along at a pretty quick rate. And things are popping up and falling away absolutely very quickly. But anywhere, you know, I'm saying these words right now. It is June. There's amazing wind outside, just outrageous wind, just seething in the trees. And the birds are singing. There's a blue jay in my backyard. I can distantly hear. Car goes by. Somebody starts the car. Somebody drives off. A dog barks. The wind blows again. The blue jay makes his song. I say a few more words. The blue jay flies away. A bus goes by. The wind comes again and dies away. That's the world we live in. This world of shifting patterns, of events happening and then ceasing to happen. We are of it and in it. We are that music, even as we listen to the music. Let's see. Well, there's other stories on my website, jayleeming.com, jayleeming.com. If you are able to support this podcast, please do so. It keeps this podcast flowing. River that I aspire for it to be. River in which my voice is just another bubble floating on that river. You can do that at patreon.com, Patreon, patreon.com/storyjl. You've listened this far. You've come to the end. It's like the end of the pier, end of the dock. I have spoken this far. We are together this far at the end of the pier, at the end of this recording, whatever this is. And from the end of this dock, what do we see? Wind, waves, water. The water goes down below us. The sky goes up above us. We are here breathing, alive in this silence, held by this silence, gifted by it. We could stand here a long time. Thank you for listening, and take care.